Thanks, Senator Crapo. I appreciate it. And thanks to all the witnesses. Since Mark raised the question of BOEM, let me just flag that one of the reasons Rhode Island got steel in the water and electrons on the grid first is because we did two very smart things that hadn't been done before. One was get a very robust data plan together so that everybody knew who was doing what in the waters where the siting was to take place. And the second is we front loaded the use conflicts. And we got those resolved or minimized at the very get-go. And BOEM, despite that, has not learned that lesson yet. And so, Mr. Walsh, I would urge you and Mark and everybody else to join me in pushing to have BOEM require applicants, when they come in with these projects, to have done a conflicting use survey and report to BOEM what conversations they've had with the other users, so that you don't end up with warfare breaking out between conflicting users that could have been headed off and instead slows things down. So I'll just flag that issue because I think we have real common cause there. Some background on this, I think the fossil fuel industry has known for decades about this problem. They've had every chance to deal responsibly with the pollution. We could have robust technologies for dealing with carbon in place, but instead the industry chose to set up front groups and traffic in lies and attack the real scientists and use immense amounts of dark money to influence politics. In effect, they ran a big covert operation against their own country to try to prevent the action that we're trying to push for now. And I think they need to be held accountable for that, plain and simple. Moreover, the rest of corporate America, there's been a lot of talk about how the rest of corporate America supports a lot of what we're talking about. Kinda. I mean, they do when they're meeting as BRT and CLC, but when they come to this building, when it's their lobbyists and their trade associations, that support has evaporated. So please, nobody watching this should think that there is effectual corporate support, particularly for carbon pricing, in Congress right now. They just aren't doing it. And I don't know if because the CEOs don't know what their posture is or because they want to stick with the trade associations who've been so much trouble. But whatever it is, the effect is there is simply no real business pressure for carbon pricing at this point. And the last point I'd make is you can't talk about natural gas emissions without talking about methane. And methane has been a nightmare, and the industry has been very sloppy about reporting and has backed away from commitments to report. So we have a lot of work to do to get the methane problem solved. And I think there are a lot of jobs in solving the methane problem. So let me turn to just a couple of quick questions. One is to Mr. Brill. Mr. Brill, the IMF has put the subsidy for fossil fuel in the United States at $600 billion per year, which obviously includes the negative externalities and not just the direct subsidies we're addressing today. Is that an economically correct way to look at the subsidy for fossil fuel, the IMF way?
Well, I wouldn't attribute that subsidy to the industry. I would agree that there are negative externalities associated with the emissions of CO2 emissions, and that's the reason why a carbon tax can help move the economy, the energy economy, away from fossil fuels and towards alternative energies and clean energies.
And you're aware of the IMF report that puts the number at 600 billion with the negative
I have not seen that report.
Okay, I'll take a look. I think Mr. Sunday, Mr. Brill, and Mr. Walsh all in their testimony supported carbon capture and removal. I'd love to offer Ms. Pope the chance to make it unanimous. And I would note that it's hard to get much carbon capture and removal going if just dumping it into the atmosphere is free. There's not much of a revenue proposition for carbon capture and removal until there is a price on emissions. And so I think those of us who support carbon capture and removal as an essential way to safety in all of this need to think about it in those terms. Mr. Brill, would you agree with that? And Ms. Pope, how do you feel about carbon capture and removal?
I would agree, yes.
Ms. Pope?
And Senator, yes, we would agree. We also believe that we need to have a combination of policies and some of
Yeah.
the lessons from
Yeah, there's no
California.
single, it's a silver buckshot, not silver bullet, I think is the way we describe it. Last thing, Mr. Brill, you talk about making progress globally. With a price on carbon, that would be consistent with global progress, you say, but it would also facilitate global progress through border adjustments, because nothing is easier to reconcile in a border adjustment than international prices on carbon. Isn't that true?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question, Senator.
Like if different countries have completely different regulatory systems for
Ah.
regulating carbon emissions, that's hard to figure out at the border who should pay what. But if one country has $100 per ton and the other has a $50 per ton, figuring out what the border adjustment should be gets a lot easier.
Absolutely. Many of our regulatory policies are not and cannot be border adjusted, but a carbon tax can be border adjusted. And your point is absolutely correct.
And that's how you get to global progress. Thank you very much, everybody. Great hearing. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Senator White.